When I say Diablo turned Rimuru into a disaster-class demon lord, what I mean is the way he meticulously crafted that image for the nobility of Falmuth. He had essentially taken all of Rimuru's feats in the past, twisted them in a way he saw was best, then fed them to Falmuth at the times he felt would have maximum impact. It was all part of his plan to break the Empire, then eventually build them anew as a nation under Rimuru's control. It's something the novel dives into very deeply, and that's a topic I figured you might want to know more about. So, whether it be the full extent as to how these three were broken first, or the full explanation of Diablo's plans as given in the novels, here's a spoiler-free breakdown of what Diablo has in store for Falmuth. But first, you know it, I know it, it's pretty obvious by the iconic cinematics, so as I'm sure you could tell, this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. If you're wondering why now when it's 5 years old, well, it's honestly cause it's not as stupid of a game as you might think it is. I know it has that negative stigma attached to it, but as far as mobile RPGs go, the amount of content it has is actually quite impressive. All of which you can check out right now with either my link or QR code. Now, you may think Raid's content is basic, pay-to-win, and pretty grindy, but from my experience it's quite the opposite. I mean, whether you're PvE, PvP, clan vs clan, or battling the cursed city and tower climbs, the 800 plus heroes and artifacts means there's infinite ways to approach all this. Getting to the endgame could take a little bit of time, but with Raid's auto-battle mode allowing for a more idle playstyle, getting there isn't this impossibly tedious grind anymore. Plus, spending money isn't even necessary since there's plenty of free-to-play players already at the top of Raid's leaderboards. As for what's new, well, from now until the end of May, Raid is doing their Spring Hunt, a massive giveaway where players can win gaming consoles and $10,000 worth of gift cards. All you gotta do is download Raid using my link or QR code, then find some hidden items out in Mistwood. You'll also get 2 epic champions just by playing, and you can even use this code to get these awesome in-game items. So, if you're in the market for a solid mobile RPG, then be sure to check out Raid and join my clan while you're at it. But now, let's get back to the video. I suppose the first and most important step of this subjugation was actually from Shion and her otherwise barbaric interrogation. We saw the end results of what she did, but what you're probably wondering is how she was able to do it. Well, in order to turn a human into living slabs of meat, you first need to understand the skill that made it possible. Master Chef and its sub-skill Certain Outcome. This was a skill that directly altered the laws of the world and essentially allowed its user to change an object's nature to the way that they wanted. So, no matter how impossible it seemed for an object to reach a certain state, if Shion could imagine it, she could make it possible. This would then become the natural state for whatever object she was altering, and it would be impossible to change unless through a more powerful law manipulation skill. So, if Shion was to turn 3 people into living, breathing meat cubes, the effects of her skill made it so it would be as if they were born that way. To paint a better picture as to what this state truly entailed, the king was described to be strings of unidentifiable organic matter connected haphazardly from one section to the other. There was a rotting stench which emitted from his box, and whatever organs could be visibly identified were clearly plucked out and glued back together without any hint of rhyme or reason. There was no other word to describe him other than some sort of sickening creature. I suppose the next question is, how was Shion able to get them to that state without killing them, and that's where we get to the torture part. You see, very incremental steps were taken to ensure nobody died from it. She would slowly yet surely peel back their layers of skin and muscles, then eventually get to scraping the meat off their bones. This was all while their physical pain was completely nullified, but it did absolutely nothing to alleviate their psychological pain. She would do so right until the 3 were on the brink of death, then heal them fully and repeat the whole process over again. So, time after time, Shion would disassemble their insides and outsides, then reassemble them to the unrecognizable state we saw in the anime. Repeat this until they were all psychologically broken, and what you have are 3 powerful Falmuth pieces ready to do your bidding. It was a true expression of body horror that was done surprisingly 100% painlessly. Well, physically painlessly. The state we see them in is therefore just one of the many reassembled states Shion left them in, and it was now their natural form, thus making regular healing ineffective. The laws governing their existence had been so incredibly twisted that unless the healing involved law manipulation of greater effect than Shion's Master Chef skill, the 3 would remain meat cubes pretty much forever. The only reason Diablo was able to do so himself was because he was able to figure out on the fly a means to bypass it. Before, he didn't even know the power of such an art and unique skill existed, but now he was able to see it was something that went beyond magic. He was able to see beyond his own limited purview of the subject and discover for himself what this new horizon was capable of. eventually leading to the successful negation of whatever forces bound them this way. Now, part of what made Diablo such a fearsome demon was his fundamentally different behavior to that of other powerful demons. You see, usually the more smart and powerful a demon was, the more likely they were to try and show off. This would lead to them emitting an aura easily detectable by barriers, and that would allow time for humans like Razin to know they were coming. It would give entire nations a chance to prepare and defend against them. For a demon as powerful as Diablo to emit zero aura at all though, that meant he could walk into any city completely undetected, then wreak havoc pretty much instantaneously. A barrier was effectively useless against him, and his presence would bring calamity without so much as a warning. It was this that made Razin so incredibly fearful of Diablo, and that feeling only intensified at the thought of the monster this demon was a butler to. This would lead Razin to offer his allegiance to Diablo instead now, and in turn result in King Admaris doing the same too. With Falmuth now in the palm of this all-powerful primordial demon, it was the only thing they could do if they wanted to keep on existing. Now, it's important to know that part of this obedience stems from Diablo's Tempter skill, which is essentially just a powerful form of coercion. It invokes certain emotions like desire or fear, then use said emotions to coerce the target into acting whatever way Diablo wanted. In this case, the emotion was fear, and the message being amplified was do what I say and you won't suffer anymore. It was a unique skill that actually worked relatively similar to Merciless. Should a person's spirit be broken in his presence, then with Tempter, Diablo would be granted full control over them. Not control like some kind of puppet master, but enough to will them to do whatever he wanted. It also notified him whenever someone under its influence was planning to defy him. So, should Admaris, Razin, or Rayheim even think about betrayal, Diablo would know and be able to do something about it. This brings us now to the ploy within the Royal Throne area, and if you're wondering how Razin and the rest got there before Diablo, it's simply because him, Rayheim, and the king had taken a warp portal first. They had teleported straight to the castle's warp chamber and feigned unconsciousness as ordered to by Diablo. The kingdom was in panic after having lost contact with its army, but now that their king was back looking like this, they were in an even greater scramble trying to fix him. It was only after Razin awoke from his fake act that the nobles could finally ask questions and get some answers. This was all part of the plan Diablo had concocted for him, and it was a small step in the overall scheme Diablo created for this country. One you'd be surprised to know he had actually shared in full with Razin beforehand. There were quite a few steps that needed to be taken in order to achieve it, but from what Razin understood, the end result would turn Falmuth into Rimuru's plaything. An outcome he knew he could do nothing about, and one that was set in stone the moment Diablo had chosen it. It was only natural Razin felt bad for his former comrades, but when he envisioned what it could mean for Falmuth as a whole, the potential prosperity for its people was actually quite inspiring. Even if it did mean toppling the current government, what would be put in its place could very well make Falmuth thrive far beyond what he thought it ever could. Now, in case you weren't aware in the anime, this noble right here was the Marquis of Muller, an additional piece Diablo had prepped beforehand and one that was in on it with Razin. Diablo was able to contact him via a connection with Fuse, and he would serve as a voice of reason amongst the chaos, one that would persuade others to listen and eventually come to the conclusion that Diablo wanted. This would also give Razin the opportunity to speak, which was for the most part the entirely made-up story revolving around Veldora and their army. He did preface by saying how they could save the king, and the way they did that was through introducing Yom. Razin had described him as the person who negotiated on their behalf, and he was on his way here bringing a potion which could fix the king. That was how the guards knew to let Yom in, and even the part about the potion was an important detail too. Of course, the main thing every noble was concerned with right now was their missing army and the unknown fate that had befallen them. It was an intentionally vague scenario Diablo crafted to separate Rimuru from it, all while using the talks of Veldora to connect it to him instead. By constantly mentioning Veldora's revival, it was only natural the nobles would think their soldiers had died for that. It was a genius move that not only dissociated Rimuru from the destruction of their army, but also provided a valid reason for how Veldora came back. A masterful play which manipulated the thoughts and minds of every noble present. This brings us now to when Yom finally made his appearance, and to explain why it was the nobles couldn't believe Razin had been saved, the main reason was because Razin was their strongest. He was the most powerful wizard in the entire country, and his defense of Falmuth lasted for over hundreds of years now. So, for Razin to be bested was rather hard to believe, but if it was coming from him then it had to be true. It was a story that became more believable when Reheim himself gave a recount of how it happened. Naturally, hearing of Rimuru's negotiation gave them hope that they could do the same, but if their only avenue was through Rimuru himself, the nobles began to realize just how badly they messed up. To them, they felt there was no chance that Rimuru would ever want to work with them. That's when Yom would paint Rimuru as the forgiving type, but even that wasn't enough to sway nobles like Carlos over here. It was nobles like him that Diablo was looking out for, and if enough acted the same way he did, Yom knew Diablo would just kill all of them. It was all part of Diablo's plan to determine whether they were worth working with or not. The only reason Diablo didn't step in at all was because to exercise force now would make things difficult later. He would simply take note of any who displayed problematic traits, then likely plan to take care of them at a future date. There was always the chance Diablo would see all of them as worthless, and this was the reason Mirand and Grucius were looking so nervous here. In fact, with the disregard for humanity Diablo exhibited before, even Yom and Razin knew that if disrespected too much, Diablo might just end up killing everyone in Falmuth. It was an outcome they were both very much trying to avoid right now. That's why Razin acted the way that he did, and it was the serious nature of the conversation which came after which would persuade the rest of the nobles to accept what Yom was offering. An open negotiation with Rimuru and the Nation of Tempest. Of course, Diablo wasn't actually going to kill anyone yet, because if he did, he knew it would go against Rimuru and what he wanted. He knew it would break the trust he was working so hard to build, and that was a risk Diablo simply wasn't willing to take right now. So, instead, what he came up with was a clever carrot and stick plan, and it applied both in a way which would allow him to manipulate all the nobles. Diablo would then step up to fix the king, and while the anime made it seem like it was the effects of Rimuru's full potion, it was really just a show put on by Diablo intended to make it seem like that. He was advertising the potion as Tempest's main export, all while performing this fake ad making it seem like it could heal anything. In actuality, he was just undoing Shion's skill himself. A simple parlor trick making it seem like the potion was doing everything. This was only because Diablo had overheard Rimuru wanting to advertise it, so in an effort to go above and beyond, he made sure to use this opportunity to do exactly that. A prime example of his attentiveness and willingness to do anything for his master. Fast forward to Diablo's message to Falmuth, and it was the king's response which was the first step towards Tempest's acknowledgement as a sovereign nation. You see, by accepting Diablo as the official messenger, the king in turn accepted Tempest as a proper negotiating partner. It was a significant gesture which informed every noble present he was serious. This also worked in Tempest's favor, since by being acknowledged as its own state now, the fact Falmuth attacked it unprovoked made the public opinion of it shift to their side. It was very unlikely now that any of Falmuth's allies would support a nation that goes around attacking other nations without good reason to. It also gave Tempest justifiable reason to hit them with the steep demands we saw in the anime. The king's own opinion didn't really matter much on any of them though, since though he was given free choice to pick whichever he wanted, Edmaris knew they each led to the same goal that Diablo desired for them. Plus, when Edmaris thought about the torture he endured at the hands of Rimuru and Shion, there was no way he would ever make the same mistakes again. I mean, the poor guy was literally forced to eat his own limbs at one point. So, in an effort to never experience that torment again, he was more than willing to follow through with the plan Diablo laid out for him, even if it did mean setting up his nation for civil war. This was a fact Edmaris was more than aware of, and the true goal behind setting up Yom as king. Now, the absurd reparation amount was of course one of the ways to widen the divide between king and nobility, but the true purpose of it was a whole nother subplot Diablo came up with to lead the world's economy. It's an interesting topic I plan to share in a different video, but one that's not entirely relevant to the Empire's takeover right now. The topic, that is the king's inevitable abdication, the lack of forces to defend himself against the inevitable revolt, then the eventual absorption of Yom and his forces. You see, by having Yom save the king's life, it was the easiest and most natural way to have the crown handed straight to him. It would be perceived as the ruined royal family handing off the job to a different generation. This would in turn make Rimuru their allies, and the only thing they needed to do then was fight on Yom's behalf. A simple job that required only a few more reinforcements, so long as no other nation decided to intervene with it. The rest was a matter of ensuring the nobles acted the way Diablo had envisioned for them, and as expected, that's exactly what happened. Edward was successfully chosen as the new king, and the timely dissemination of information led to Rimuru being seen as a disaster-class demon lord. He had made clear Rimuru was now part of the newly formed Octogram and highlighted the fact that he was an ally to the fearsome Storm Dragon. His leadership was shown to be brilliant beyond compare, and his claim to the Forest of Jura was the very testament to that. These were all feats essential to Rimuru's image, and it was all part of Diablo's plan to build him up as this impenetrable leader. So, that was the first part of his plan to take control of the kingdom, and as I'm sure you could tell, it's all going exactly as Diablo had pictured it. His subordinates were working hard knowing betrayal meant death, and that in turn made it so he just needed to sit back and relax. It'll be interesting to see if things continue to go smoothly for him, but I'm kinda hoping they don't so we can see him in action for once. That's pretty much it for Diablo's plan though, so I hope you enjoyed learning more about it. If you did, then consider leaving a like and subscribing. I'll try to make more videos like these in between my Mushoku Tensei ones. Now, before I go, I just want to thank Raid Shadow Legends once again for sponsoring this video. You can download the game for free using the link in the description or the QR code. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!